All right, let's now welcome legal analyst Mpumelelo Zikalala, who is going to help us unpack this particular matter. Mpumelelo, very good afternoon to you. Let's start with Omotoso's immigration matters before I engage you on the NPA's appeal prospects in the other long-standing matter. So, essentially, Omotoso will not be deported for now. The NPA confirming his release after he was not brought to court within that 48 hours as required. So unpack it for us. I mean, what's your take on his immigration charges and how the department, together with the NPA, the Department of Home Affairs, that is, together with the NPA, handled this part of his legal woes?
Good afternoon to you and also to our viewers. Well, I would say they haven't handled it in a proper manner. If they've done so, you would have had an instance where you have someone who's behind bars, who's being prosecuted as we speak, or the bail applications proceedings that were supposed to continue today. Now, to have the court then have to go back and say, did you comply with Section 35 of our Constitution by bringing this person or the person who's an accused within the 48 hours? Then it's another procedural flaw that needs to be investigated. But the second part of it then says, within the Immigration Act, there will be various steps that one would need to traverse. Failing those steps or being rejected, and then only after they've been rejected, communicated to them that your visa has not been granted or relevant payments have not been granted. You then say you are now a person non grata in South Africa. You must leave. If you haven't left, only then will I come in and arrest you in terms of breaking that Immigration Act. If you don't follow those rules and procedures to the T, that's why you are going to find yourself with, for lack of a better word, with egg on your face when you go to court if you try to enforce the law, because the presiding officers are going to say, you know better, you know the provisions that are applicable, and they were supposed to be followed to the T. And the same applies to the investigating officers and the prosecution is in this stage, because if a person is arrested over a weekend, the very next Monday, that person should go and appear so that you're able to comply with the Section 35 provisions of the 48 hours provision. And the Constitution is very clear. If it expires on a Sunday, the very next day, that's when a person should be brought to court and the matter should be adjudicated, or they can file for bail. But at least they should be told this is what you're arrested for and appear in front of a presiding officer.
So let's segue then to the other matter and perhaps how this particular immigration matter implicates that. So on the numerous charges of rape, abuse and human trafficking, and of course, the matter that the NPA announced that, following the legal opinion from senior counsel and after its thorough consideration by experienced prosecutors, it will now appeal the acquittal of Omotoso. So the entity was criticized, as you know, for its quote-unquote bundling of the case, prompting even the Justice Minister to demand a report. Do you believe there are then reasonable prospects of a successful appeal in this case?
Well, I must sound a disclaimer first of saying that I'm shooting from the dark because I don't have the intimate details of the matter. However, two things are noted. One, I think as the NPA would have issued a statement that says I've noted and filed my appeal, rather than the one that says I'm still going to do it, because the lapse of time is very important. So the longer you wait, the more it's going to be difficult for you to start the matter again, or even trying to get the person who was accused in this case. You've already stated and noted that they don't have a stable address in South Africa. So if they decide tomorrow that they want to go to another place, it's going to be difficult for them to bring them back. But let's now get into the merits of the appeal in which they are going to get into. Now, once you note an appeal, all the evidence that was submitted earlier, you are stuck with it. You can't add new evidence unless you make a new application, which will be fiercely opposed, taking into account the manner in which Omotoso has been handling his litigation. So you are stuck with the lesser form of evidence in which he was found not guilty on. You need to work very hard to be able to show a court that a reasonable presiding officer in the shoes of a person who was listening to the matter in the court would have come to a different conclusion. That's going to be the very difficult part in terms of doing so. Maybe the only thing they can hinge on are the statements of the presiding officer of saying, I believe the people that came and the witnesses, I have no reason to doubt that they are telling us the truth. So then the question would be, if you do believe them, then what's the problem in terms of finding any wrongdoing that has taken place? But In terms of the shortfall of the NPA, the lack of proper cross-examination is alleged by the presiding officer. Sometimes the bundling of the procedures, they can't run away from that, and they need to find a way of being able to fix that first before they move on. Unfortunately, they can't in an appeal. They are left with whatever, or they are stuck with whatever that was provided earlier.
I do have an understanding that court papers have been filed in the Gqeberha High Court. I speak under correction. But the NPA is also, reportedly investigating the conduct of the first team of prosecutors involved in the rape case, which started in August of 2024. We understand also that a report from the investigation is expected in June 2025, that's next month. I mean, just having to hear that in terms of the NPA's next steps, what are we likely then to see in that investigation?
But probably to hear whether there was compliance with the NPA Act. Remember, prosecutors must prescribe to the National Prosecuting Authority Act. It's their code of conduct. That's how they are regulated in terms of how they must do their work on a daily basis. When it comes to the level of performance, professionalism, and service which is expected, also they have their own internal policies that they must be able to stick to. Now, if there's been non-compliance, unfortunately, these are the results of the non-compliance. And it is something in which the NPA would like to sound the soundboard on to fellow prosecutors to say, if you do not take your work seriously, if you commit these type of errors, these are the consequences that will follow. But most importantly, from our own, this is how we are going to punish you to make sure that these type of things don't ever happen again. At the end of the day, prosecutors are dealing with people's lives because they are victims that need justice, and that justice cannot be obtained if there are going to be professional mistakes or mistakes which are going to be done during the prosecution of the whole process. So I think it's going to be very important for the NPA, for a lack of a better word, to send a lesson to others to say, if you don't do your work diligently, this is how we are going to deal with you.
I mean, when we look at, and as we conclude our conversation, when we look at what the NPA had initially said in terms of just before Omotoso was acquitted, that after his acquittal, he will be deported immediately. So when you take that into consideration, and of course, the fact that he has now been released on this particular matter, and the appeal process. I mean, what are the implications in as far as if he ought to be deported, as an example, if that happens, whilst this process still continues?
I think maybe at the time they hadn't contacted the Home Affairs to check what's the status of his application. Is there an application filed or not? Yeah. But that's neither here nor there. But the important one is this one. If you then deport a person when an appeal has been lodged, you now have a date for that appeal to be able to continue. It then means you revert the judgment as if it has never been issued. The problem that you're going to find is bringing him back to South Africa. That means extradition proceedings that have to be made in his country of origin or the country in which is going to be found upon. Most importantly, is that particular country a signatory? Do we have a treaty between us and that country to say, if there's someone that we're looking for, they must be deported back? If we don't, then we're in more trouble. If we do, then all those proceedings will start, similar to what is happening to Bushiri. And if the appeal processes within that country is further delays up until they then come back, until that particular appeal is being dealt with in South Africa. So it's going to be a lot of time and a lot of effort to start this whole process again once he's left the country, which is why I was saying earlier, it's much better to say that an appeal has been filed and I'm simply waiting for a date so that you will get the ball rolling in terms of all the other activities.
Thank you so much, Mpumelelo, for that analysis. Legal analyst Mpumelelo Zikalala there for us.